Hello and welcome to another episode of Guess That Record. I am your host, Jackson Reed. This is the show where we talk about music and try to figure out which album I pulled from my collection. Thanks again to you, the listeners, for tuning in to another episode. We have an incredible guest today. A keyboardist and founding member of the band Toto, our guest has been having success in music since the 1970s. Aside from Toto, he's worked with Michael Jackson, Don Henley, Chicago, and many more. I'm super excited to welcome Steve Porcaro to Guess That Record. How are you doing, Steve?
I'm doing great, and you? It's good to see you.
Yeah, I'm doing great. So where are we talking to you from today?
I'm in the Valley in Los Angeles, in the San Fernando Valley, in a place called Studio City.
Awesome. And you got your keyboards back there, I see.
I got some, yeah. You know, it's actually unusual these days. I use so many. I'm so, as we say, in the box a lot these days, where I use a lot of synthesizers that are living inside the computer. But lately, I've been actually pulling out some of the old favorites, and I just got my CS80, which is one of my favorite synths ever. I just got that out of the shop. It was missing in action for a while, and it's home now, and it's working perfectly, and I'm thrilled.
Excellent. Yeah. It's so cool to be speaking with you today, especially for myself, because all the way back in 2022, I had the chance to interview David Paich. So
great.
It's pretty cool to have you on the show to sort of follow up on that, since you guys work together a lot.
We have, and I'm looking forward to working with him some more. I just was before I got on with you, I was listening to some old digitized cassette tapes of some motifs and ideas of David's and mine that I can't wait to surprise him and play him and see if he wants to finish some of these things.
Cool. Now, it's interesting because you obviously came from a musical family. Your brothers, Jeff and Mike, were also in Toto. How did you all end up on your respective instruments?
It happened pretty naturally. There were always drums around the house because my dad being a drummer. So we all played drums at some point, even if it was just grabbing a couple sticks and playing on the rug. But Jeff, from day one, I remember him doing a talent contest when he was in kindergarten, and he played to Miles Davis's Bag's Groove. He just played the record. Was what he did for this talent contest he did. Jeff was always kind of there. Mike was a great drummer. Mike was playing drums and had taken some lessons, and Mike was always a very solid drummer. But I remember, like, around the time I was 4 years old, someone backed up with a pickup truck to our house in the projects and unloaded a little spinet piano, and I was hooked immediately.
Right.
And then when the Beatles came out, I mean, the day after we saw the Beatles on the Ed Sullivan Show, both Mike and Jeff started taking guitar lessons. And Jeff lasted about 2 weeks, maybe. And Mike kept it up a little bit longer. Soon after that, we moved to California in 1966. And Mike, the guitar playing led to the bass.
Right.
Led to him playing bass. I think he was like in sixth grade or so.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was pretty natural.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. And it kind of makes me think on the spot here, but of course you all got your start professionally in the 70s, of course, and by that point, keyboard technology was starting to get more and more complex. How did you sort of go from, keyboards to the big synthesizers?
Yeah, well, I kind of saw, I was always a horrible student. I was, I had something going on as far as keyboards go, and I loved playing it, but we all of a sudden started our heroes kind of became these studio musicians that were doing what my father was doing, and we started really reading album cover credits and seeing being very aware of all these musicians in town that were making a living, being session musicians, and it seemed very doable. It seemed, it wasn't just this pipe dream of being a rock star or being like the Beatles. Being a studio musician, being that our father did it, that's where he went to work every day, was these studios. We saw that as a definitely a possibility, and but. Unlike my brothers, I kind of always felt that I was never on the level that, some of my keyboard heroes in the studio, like Leon Russell and a lot of friends of my dad that were doing session work. They were really incredible jazz players, incredible classical players. They read great, and and I felt like, even in high school, that I was nowhere near that level. The way that Jeff was just this natural drummer, and you could tell when he was in junior high school that he had a very promising career ahead of him. But I'd also, from a very early age I was always attracted to organs. I was always attracted to the bells and whistles, the keyboards with a lot of bells and whistles on it. And I saw early on, in high school, as I was getting more and more attracted to synthesizers and seeing, being enamored with guys like Keith Emerson and Rick Wakeman and Kerry Minier from Gentle Giant, all these guys, I saw this gap that there weren't that many session synthesists. There were a couple, but there weren't that many. And generally the rule was that it seemed to me that the better at keyboards you were, the better of a piano, say a pure pianist you were, say a classical pianist, the best pianist you could think of, they wouldn't dream of touching a synthesizer, of ruining their touch by playing different keyboards. And the best synthesists, the guys who seemed to know the most about synthesizers, were kind of these nerdy guys that were, you know what I'm saying, could build a sequencer for you, but you didn't necessarily want to hear them play jazz piano.
Yeah.
And so I saw this chasm there. I saw this gap, and I thought, maybe I could fill that in some way, make friends with great keyboard players and help them with their synthesizers. So that was kind of my way in.
For sure, yeah. This episode of Guess That Record is sponsored by Marvel Marketing. Marvel Marketing is an award-winning digital marketing company headquartered in Calgary, Alberta, Canada. Working with clients in different industries from all over North America, including Canada, the United States, and Mexico. Marvel Marketing services include website design and development, website maintenance, search engine optimization, public relations services, and social media management, amongst others. To find out more, visit marvelmarketing.ca. This episode of Guess That Record is sponsored by GuitarWorks. One of Canada's top independent music stores for over 30 years, GuitarWorks carries a huge selection of musical instruments from the biggest brands in music, including Gibson, Fender, Martin, Yamaha, and Paul Reed Smith. Visit any of their 2 Calgary locations or shop online at guitarworks.ca and join the Guitar Perks program to earn money back with every purchase. GuitarWorks, your total guitar store. This episode of Guess That Record is also sponsored by Recordland, home to the largest selection of music in Canada. Buy, sell, and trade tapes, CDs, and vinyl. Located in Calgary's Inglewood neighborhood on 9th Avenue Southeast, visit them in person or on Instagram at Recordland Calgary. And, it was so hard, like, as I was preparing for the interview, it was so hard to kind of narrow down, like, what to ask you about, because you've played on so many amazing songs. But starting off with Toto, I wanted to ask you about a song off the album Hydra, which was 99. And that was a song, I got to see Toto a couple years ago, and hearing it live really kind of it changed the song for me and made me kind of appreciate it more, because it's so atmospheric and really driven by the keyboard playing on the song. So what was it like to put that track together?
I remember that very well because that was the second album. That was the Hydra album, and I had just gotten this huge modular system. It was kind of crazy, but I all of a sudden found myself having this huge modular system, and 99 in particular, the solo on 99 was something that I wanted to use the modular system for. And my friend, Roger Lynn, of Lynn Drum Machines fame, was helping me, taught me a lot, was teaching me about synthesis and teaching me a lot of the basics. And he was actually in the studio when we were doing that session for the solo, and he helped me with he helped me getting the lead sound on the modular synthesizer, and just watching him do some of the most, and it was a pretty basic sound, but watching the way he did it, watching how he on the Polyfusion, nothing was preset, nothing was patched behind the scenes. You had to patch everything. So it made it look very complicated, but yet at the same time, it was a great learning. It was a great way to learn because you saw everything. You could see the control path as well as the signal path, the audio path of everything. It was like kind of right there to follow. It was a really cool way to learn. And also, yeah, thanks for using that word. I've always atmosphere has always been a huge thing for me, a huge thing about my songs and about my music and the kind of sounds I like to do. I love to feel like you're somewhere when you're working on a song. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, for sure. And it's also, kind of cool hearing that story because, like, that album came out in '79, so it's like right before those like synthesizers start to get easier to use. It's still of that era where it was like you really had to know what you were doing to use that stuff.
Pre-MIDI,
Yeah,
and yes, and I'd learned things like a mini Moog and the CS80. I had gotten this CS80 for the first album, and that's another thing, is that there were so few synthesizers then, other than the kind of the modular stuff, which was really kind of going off the deep end. There were so few synthesizers. The few that I had, the mini Moog and like the CS80, I mastered them. I knew them inside and out. And that's why that led to me programming for guys. Guys loved having me around to where, I was just telling someone today, I mean, David Paich did a bunch of stuff when he was just him and my brother Jeff were doing their very first demos. David could get great sounds on a mini Moog. He could get great bass sounds. A lot of these guys, they could easily stumble into getting a very cool sound. They all had great ears, but it was when you're doing sessions and the clock is ticking and it's $350 an hour and there's a producer there and there's an engineer there and there's the artist sitting there. They liked having me around because while maybe they were able to fall into something, luck into something sometime, they liked having me around. I was kind of like a security blanket for a lot of these guys, I think, in a way.
For sure, yeah.
The pressure was on and they had to deliver, and why isn't this synth staying in tune or whatever? I kind of was the synth whisperer for guys like David Paich and David Foster.
Yeah, for sure. And moving on, of course, this record here, Toto 4, was the breakthrough album for you guys. And I wanted to ask you about the song Waiting for Your Love, because that's an interesting, I think it's got a great keyboard solo in the middle of it with a lot of like fast parts. So what was it like putting that track together?
Yeah, no, that's a very unusual track, and I was real proud of that. For the most part on Toto 4, what was great, what was the big change from in the previous albums was that was when David Paich, we had gotten he had two 24-track tape machines in our home studio. which was really kind of unheard of. You know, we were truly able to take our time and do whatever we wanted to do. And we didn't have the clock ticking like it usually was, or the whole band behind us with their arms folded waiting for us to deliver something as fast as they delivered parts. I could really take my time. I could really experiment. I had learned just the most basic kind of engineering, just gain structure, how to get a good level on tape. So on songs like Rosanna and Africa, I was able to do all kinds of experimenting, and it really paid off. A lot of the stuff you hear on the album synthwise was because I had that much time that you usually didn't in the studio. But Waiting for Your Love is the exception. That song, I remember we did those solos at Record One. We did them in a different studio. And I remember I mostly used the Prophet 5, I believe, for the solo on Waiting for Your Love. And it was both David and I. And I had written out my solo. I had written it out. I just would kind of sing in my head what I wished I could improvise, but it was more of a composed thing. But then the second half was David Paich, and he, of course, was just blowing. That was just coming off the top of his head in real time.
Yeah.
So it was very cool, and I remember it, and I loved it. And what a great song of Bobby's, you know.
For sure, yeah. And it's funny you mentioned the studio setup that you guys had, because I remember David telling me about that when I interviewed him, how it was like the home studio setup for that album. Is that kind of similarly on the Rosanna keyboard solo? Was that kind of a similar setup where it was you and David trading licks, or just
yes,
one guy?
Very much, but it was just us. None of the guys were around, and we had really taken our time. I had kind of was taking my time putting together, again, writing out that initial phrase, you know, that initial triumphant figure that the synthesizers play at the beginning of the solo. But then David was very much a huge part of it with me, and we kind of went around the room. We were like, let's do something with the Mini Moog now, and then we did a very typical Rick Wakeman. You know, we would just kind of we pieced it together. The morning before, late in the middle of the night until dawn, we worked on that solo until they mixed it that day. So we kind of just came in under the wire and put together, you know, this solo with kind of no rules, you know?
Yeah, yeah. And then, of course, another, you know, major album for you was this one here, Thriller. And, you know, it's so cool because you obviously wrote Human Nature, which I would say is probably one of my favorite songs ever. I remember when I interviewed David, I told him how it was like, you know, whenever I hear that song, I just kind of drift off and start thinking about life and that sort of thing. And it's interesting because that song kind of ended up in Quincy Jones' possession almost by accident. Is that correct?
Yes. He was he heard it. It was unfinished. Certainly the lyrics weren't done. The track was pretty much done, you know, the way I had demoed it. And there was my rough vocal on it, but it was on the other side of a tape of a couple of David Paich's songs. Mm-hmm. It was kind of heard by accident. I never would have turned it in. It was unfinished. The lyrics weren't finished. I was singing on it. I would have never submitted something for Michael Jackson with me singing on it. But Quincy, you know, in his words, what he was so attracted to was the atmosphere. You know, that was what really attracted him, was that world that we were in.
Yeah. And the process of putting the song together, how did that go?
It was incredibly smooth because Quincy was so respectful of my demo. He loved my demo so much. We kind of recreated it in the studio. Now, of course, he once he had that, which was the same basic drum machine part, my sequenced bass part, me playing. The GS1 is with the basic Rhodes part. David Page playing playing synth pads. David added that sequenced line at the beginning. That was David's idea. I sequenced it. We were such a good team. And then of course Quincy brought Lukather in, my bandmate, and had him play that guitar part that I never would have thought of in a million years, and totally made it a Michael Jackson tune. That's what made it a Michael Jackson tune. When I first heard it, I was taken aback. I hated it because it was the one thing that was so different than my demo. And then, of course, Quincy, being the great producer that he is, he hooked me up with John Bettis to finish the lyrics. He loved my chorus and loved my title, but, he brought in John Bettis, which I was, thrilled, who just did an incredible job with the verse lyrics and really made it a good song, not only a good record, but a good song, and gave it a narrative. And I'm forever thankful he did.
Yeah, and of course, to kind of show how I guess revered that song is, a lot of people may not know that Miles Davis did a cover of Human Nature.
He sure did.
Mm-hmm.
He sure did. Something I was very proud of. Growing up before the Beatles, there was some classical music, some big bands, some popular music in our household, but 80%, 85% of what we heard was Miles Davis quintets. Those were my dad's favorite. Miles and Coltrane were the guys, and those drummers, in those mid 50s to mid 60s, Miles Davis quintets. That was all we heard in our household. So the fact to get something, for Miles to cover it was a huge deal.
Absolutely. And just keeping it on Thriller here again, what's another story or memory you have from the making of that record that really sticks out with you?
Everything else I did on Thriller was what I typically did. On a session, on a Quincy Jones session. Although Quincy, I first met him through David Foster. David Foster brought me in to program for David Foster, who was doing keyboards. We were quite a potent team. But by the time Thriller came along, Quincy was hiring me just to, he'd often bring me in and just say, what do you hear on something? And quite often there was already something else there. He just wanted to hear what ideas I had. I'm sure like almost every single song on Thriller at one point I put a part on. But, that was something Quincy did a lot, was he would try different ideas. It didn't mean just because you played on it didn't mean it was going to be kept. So the other things I did on Thriller were just my typical session kind of things I did on the spot, ideas I had on the spot, or a section they would need beefing up, like on Beat It or something like that, in the bridge and the breakdown. I did some sequencer parts. The Girl Is Mine, I did some overdubs. And then on the Rod Tepperton song, Lady in My Life, I did something on PYT too. I did some very simple synth part on that. And then Lady in My Life was a Rod Tepperton tune, and I could tell what synthesizer she had used on his demo, and I had that synth and had my guys bring that synth in and just try to help him recreate his demo.
Awesome. Yeah.
One of the last things we did. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And as I was doing my research, I was surprised to learn about your work with Don Henley here. Was Dirty Laundry, that was sort of the first time you got to work with him. Is that correct?
It was. And I want to make sure right away I make it very clear. It was Danny Korchmar, Cooch. I got to say his name, make sure. I've done some interviews before, and I think that got lost, that this was all about Cooch and these great ideas he had. I kind of just came in and helped them pull off what it was Cooch wanted. They wanted that real farfisa. And I just brought in a little piece of gear. Actually, it's this guy right here. It was actually that little piece of modular gear, and I put the audio of the farfisa through there, and then I had a cowbell on a drum machine, which they had all synced up. They did such an amazing job with the technology, and Greg Ladani, the great engineer Greg Ladani, had recorded the sync tone, so it just was it was very easy to just gate that part. But that was all. That was Cooch's idea, and then Don. I had told them I couldn't get one. I had all kinds of connections in the synth world, but there was this brand new thing out called an emulator, and I heard there was just like 7 of them in existence, which was this, one of the first commercially available samplers, and I couldn't get my hands on one. But sure enough, Don Henley could get his hands on one, and so we did all kinds of these sound effects at the end, and we actually even did the background vocals through there. Kick them when they're up, kick them when they're down. It was really they were amazing to work with. Cooch was amazing to work with. Really fun, really demanding, and yet it was a favorite session I'd love to talk about because everything just kind of clicked. Everything worked easily. All that time I spent, learning the modular stuff and learning spending all this time in this very non-musical way sometimes that would frustrate my bandmates. It really came to fruition on a session like that.
Yeah. And I also read that you worked on this record here, the follow-up with Don Henley. What was it like to work on Boys of Summer? Because to me, that is just like one of the quintessential 80s songs, and such a great keyboard song. So yeah, how did you get involved on that one?
It was very much a fluke thing. They had called me. The song was done. The song was done. They just were calling me to find out if I had some magic device that could change the key. Don wanted to sing it up a half step. This is the way I remember it. I'm very careful with some of these stories because I'll see other interviews with some other guys involved, and they'll tell a completely different story. But the way I remembered it was they just wanted to know if I had something that could transpose it, like an auto tune. We do have plugins now that work pretty cool could change the key of a whole thing, but then there really wasn't anything that did that. So just with Mike Campbell in the room with me, just with the drum machine, he had the Lynn drum machine that they had recorded that had done the original track. I just on an Oberheim synthesizer replayed the basic synth part in the new key. Dun, dun, boom, bum, bum, bum. And then they went and finished it brilliantly with Pino Palladino on bass, and really the synth stuff that Cooch did was on all their stuff was amazing. Was incredible.
Yeah.
I didn't do that much on that album.
Yeah, for sure. And, moving into the present, you just put out a new solo album recently called The Very Day. And what made you, or what was the timing like that made you go, okay, it's time to do a new record?
I had done one like 9 years ago while I was working with Toto again, while I was touring with Toto. And I just simply reached a point in my life. I've always hung on to these song ideas. I after Human Nature, I realized that, and Toto was always great, and they would let me do whatever I wanted to do as far as recording songs go. There was definitely a pecking order in the band with my older brother and David Paich, but there was never a thing about the songwriting where they wouldn't record something of mine or anyone else's in the band. They were always encouraging. But I just had this, it's so easy, with all this stuff too, with all these with all this technology, and it's easy. And I mean, any musician, any acoustic guitar player can tell you, it's so easy to start a song, but finishing it is a whole nother thing. And sometimes for a lot of artists, they'll tell you it's that pressure of having to have it done. You know, the clock's ticking, the studio time, we have to start mixing next week. We need to finish this song. And sometimes what we do is actually work. You know, you have to go in and finish that song, whether you feel like it or not. Maybe the initial idea came to you real easy, but finishing it has always been an issue for me. And so what the impetus was for me was looking in the mirror and trying to figure out when the hell my hair got white, you know, how my hair was turning gray, and the realization that the clock was ticking and it's time to, some of these really cool pieces that I had, it's time to start finishing these things. And I had just stopped touring, and I just stopped doing any film work. And I was in this really great position where I could really do whatever I want with my time. And I just I started picking up the phone, calling friends to help me finish things, realizing I couldn't always do it on my own. And the very day is the fruit of that, you know. And I've got 2 more albums just about done now. I can't wait to I just want to do this from here on out, is finish songs, finish them, you know.
Yeah, that's awesome. And it was really cool, like looking on this record in particular, seeing like the list of people that you got to work on it. And one name that stood out for me was that you did a few songs with Stan Lynch, who is Tom Petty's drummer. So how did he get involved on this project?
Sure, I knew Stan. I'd met Stan briefly, and then there was a time while I was not in Toto where he was working very closely with the guys in Toto, where he was writing and helping them finish songs, especially in the lyric department. And it was just one of those things of me finally, putting a deadline on myself, saying, let's get this finished. And I was calling all kinds of people, and Stan Lynch was one of them. Stan was one of them. He initially helped me with a song I had done with David Paich, and we had a very good idea of the kind of lyrics we want, and even had some rough lyrics sketched out. But I was like, let's bring in somebody, and I just cold called him after not speaking to him for years. And like I said, David had worked with him with Toto a few years back. He's always, part of the kind of, all these guys kind of become part of the family, you know. I wasn't afraid to call him, and he graciously helped us with that, and then helped me finish a couple other things. One that's not on the album, but definitely helped me with my song Marilyn, which is cut one, side one.
Mm-hmm. And the last song on the album, I believe, is the one with
Saints and Angels was the first thing what we did with David Paich and myself.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
Yeah, we called him up, and Stan played drums on that too, brilliantly.
Mm-hmm.
Brilliantly. He's got a beautiful setup at home. He's got a gorgeous studio, and, you know.
Yeah, for sure. And just while we're talking about like making new albums and that sort of thing, of course, in this day and age, it's much easier to record keyboards with digital technology and all that stuff. Do you have a preference for like what style of keyboard and synth you like to use, like the older stuff or the newer stuff?
Yeah, I like it all. I like it all. Sometimes, yes, I'll just get up a standard general synthesizer that, that's a classic synth voice, 2 oscillators, a filter, and, an amplifier, and, a couple of envelopes on there, and I'll just want to dial in something that I know, a typical Oberheim sound, a typical CS80 sound, basically. But I love, like everyone else, poking through these new presets, these new synthesizers they put together, these plugins. There's tons of brilliant stuff in there. Mm-hmm. The way I'm wired, I want to know them all. I really want to know how to deconstruct these sounds, and I want to control that LFO, how fast it's going, and I'm so next thing I know, I'm watching a bunch of YouTube videos, as opposed to having the manual out before. But I'm I'm constantly seduced by the new technology and new synthesizers.
Yeah.
So I hopefully do a little bit of it all. Where my old tricks come in handy, and also though I love being surprised by some new stuff and hearing some ear candy, something no one's heard before.
Yeah, for sure.
So.
All right, Steve. Well, we are going to be entering into the guessing segment of this podcast.
Dear.
So I'll explain the rules to you and any new listeners we may have. In this bag here is a record from my collection. I'm going to give you 3 clues about this album, and then we play a game of 20 questions to try and figure out what it is. So,
wow.
Steve Porcaro, are you ready to guess that record?
Sure, why not?
All right, here are your 3 clues. This album came out in the 1970s. It features only 3 songs on the entire album, and you've worked with this band before. Question 1.
It's got to be Yes.
It is a Yes album.
It's got to be Yes. 3 songs was the giveaway.
Yeah.
Close to the Edge, which is one of my. I still, on a regular basis, listen to Close to the Edge.
Well, you are correct. It was Close to the Edge. So,
yeah.
What can you tell the listeners about this album here?
It was a pinnacle for them. The first time I saw Yes was in the very early 70s. I was with my brother Jeff. They were playing at the Long Beach Arena, and their new drummer, Alan White, had only been with them for like 2 weeks. They announced from on stage. And I never missed a Yes concert after that. Alan was brilliant, but take nothing away from Alan White, absolutely brilliant drummer, and he was amazing in Yes, but there was something about Bill Bruford. There was a certain chemistry with him, and if you look closely, Bill is given some writing credit, and the way they put together, it was just masterful. The way those songs were put together, especially Close to the Edge, thematically, establishing themes, it being this incredibly challenging music, but then having these moments that were just so hooky. I love a good hook. I'm a sucker for a commercial hit record, and Yes proved that with Roundabout. They were one of those exception to the rules bands. I lived by those bands. Those were my inspiration. Steely Dan, a band that could, what was this guy's voice, and listen to these chord changes, and yet they were hooks. Mm-hmm. They were incredible. Their lyrics were incredible. There was no one like them. They were an exception to the rule. Yes, doing Roundabout, to have that, sure, it was an edited version, but it was on top 40 radio and played constantly with all these different sections, with these cool synth parts. Rick Wakeman's keyboard playing is just so brilliant, Yeah, and I had heard Yes very early on, their second album, Time in a Word. My brother Jeff had hit me to them. And then Your Move was something from the Yes album. This is still before Rick was in the band. Steve Howe had joined then, and then Fragile with Rick Wakeman, and that led to Close to the Edge, and especially those 3 albums, the Yes album, Fragile, and Close to the Edge, were just like incredible. And John Anderson's voice and the way these guys put this stuff together in the studio, just brilliant.
Absolutely.
Just brilliant. So inspiring to me.
Yeah. And
to this day.
Yeah, for sure. And on Close to the Edge, I wanted to bring up on the title track because it's really interesting. And I guess, it goes to show like how, these guys were really good at putting songs together. But in the sort of breakdown section of the song where it gets like kind of spacey, it's cool because they had Rick Wakeman play an actual church organ, which is like, it's so, it's a lot of unique uses of all types of sounds that they had at that time, which is really cool.
Sure. Prog bands, Emerson, Lake and Palmer did that also, Keith, on the very first album.
Mm-hmm.
They would go to some church somewhere and use the real thing. It's amazing.
Yeah. And I do think my favorite song off of Close to the Edge would have to be, just going to get the title right, And You and I, which is the second song. And I think that's such a cool track because I love how it builds up throughout the song. It starts out quiet and then it just builds up and builds up. But it's also cool because it's like, it's still a 10-minute prog rock epic, but it's got almost sort of a folk rock feel to it, which is, again, pretty unique.
Gorgeous. They used to open up all their shows with Siberian Khatru. That was a great opener. The sections in there, all those different sections, I loved. Yeah, what can you say?
For sure. Yeah. And then, I did want to ask you about this because you got to work with Yes many years later on the Union album. And for those who don't know, that was an interesting record because it Yes has had a lot of lineup changes. And so that album was like bringing every previous member of Yes together in one project. So how did you get involved on that?
Yeah, I had done some work with the guy who was producing that, who had, I might even say the unenviable job of trying to deal with all these different personalities and try to wrangle all that. A guy, Jonathan Elias, I had just done some stuff for him and John Anderson he'd been working with. And so I was brought in. I mean, unfortunately, one of my heroes, Rick Wakeman, was appalled that a Yes album would bring in LA studio guys. It was unthinkable. And as a hardcore fan, it was unthinkable for me. So I very much have mixed feelings about it. I got to work with Chris Squire and Alan White in this little short-lived band, the Chris Squire Project. We did some live stuff together. We did a little tour of California. That I was very thrilled with my friend Billy Sherwood and Mark Williams, and I was very thrilled to be part of that. And Jimmy Hahn, a guitar player friend, was also part of that for a while. I was thrilled to be part of that. But the stuff on while I'm thrilled to be able to say I played on a Yes album. You know what I mean? I hate the fact that my hero, Rick Wakeman, was like, he hated that stuff and that some session guys were brought in. I wasn't the only one, but, the fact that he dislikes it so much breaks my heart a little bit, So.
Yeah, that's fair. I get where you're coming from for sure. But, yeah. Well, Steve, it is we've reached the end of the interview, and I want to thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me today. It was awesome to get to learn about your career. And where can the listeners check out your work and give you a follow?
Oh, please. There's Steve Porcaro Music is my website, and where you can buy, you can get some of my first solo album Someday Somehow, and but also The Very Day is available everywhere. It's now just been released on CD and vinyl. You can get it on Amazon, and it's on all the music, Apple Music, Spotify, you name it, Tidal, whatever. It's everywhere. Mm-hmm. So please give it a listen.
And your social handles or website, anything like that?
Yeah, I'm there on. I'm all over the place on Facebook, Instagram, whatever.
Perfect. Yeah. Thanks for tuning in to another episode of Guess That Record. Make sure to leave a 5-star review wherever you listen and tell your friends to check us out. I wanted to shout out our radio partners currently airing Guess That Record as a syndicated show. CKMS in Kitchener, Ontario, CKXU in Lethbridge, Alberta, and South Devon Sound in Kingsbridge, UK. So if you're in those markets, be sure to check those stations out to hear the show. If you're with a radio station and you'd be interested in adding Guess That Record to your programming, send us an email to guessthatrecordpodcast@gmail.com. We'd also appreciate it if you follow us on Instagram and TikTok, where our username on both platforms is @GuessThatRecord. And lastly, subscribe to our YouTube channel to see the video versions of these amazing interviews. Remember to keep rocking, and we'll see you on the next episode of Guess That Record.